I rehearsed the words 1,000 times, watching as each practiced syllable fogged the bathroom mirror. 3 decades of silence about to shatter in a single afternoon. My sister Catherine wouldn't be there to stop me this time. Her ashes sat in a polished mahogany box, waiting to be memorialized by a family built on carefully constructed lies. They deserve to know, I whispered to my reflection, a woman I barely recognized anymore. 62 years had carved deep lines around my eyes, testament to decades of forced smiles and swallowed truths. The black dress I'd chosen hung on the bathroom door, appropriately somber for a memorial service, though not nearly dark enough to match what I planned to do. Outside, rain lashed against the hotel windows, the universe providing suitable weather for what would either be an act of long-overdue justice or unforgivable cruelty. Perhaps both. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop. Rebecca, my daughter. Mom, where are you? Everyone's starting to arrive at the church. I drew a steadying breath. Just finishing up. 20 minutes. Are you okay? You sound... She paused, searching for the right word. My brilliant daughter, always so perceptive. Different. I'm fine, I lied, one final time. Just saying goodbye to your aunt in my own way. After hanging up, I slipped into the dress, applied a final coat of lipstick. Catherine would have commented on the shade being too bold for a funeral, and gathered the manila folder I'd kept hidden for 34 years. Inside were the documents that would either free us all or tear the remaining fragments of our family apart. Either way, by sunset, the Blackwood family would never be the same. The church parking lot was filled with luxury cars, a testament to the social status Catherine had cultivated so carefully. Her husband Richard's silver Bentley occupied the spot closest to the entrance, naturally. Even in death, Catherine would insist on proper hierarchies being maintained. Inside the vestibule, familiar faces turned towards me with expressions of practiced sympathy. The widower Richard, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, nodded solemnly from across the room. His perfectly knotted tie and freshly shined shoes made me wonder if grief ever cracked his polished veneer. 30 years of marriage to my sister had trained him well in the art of appropriate appearances. Rebecca materialized at my side, her hand slipping into mine. At 38, she looked more like Catherine than me. Tall, elegant, her dark hair swept into a chignon so tight it seemed to pull her features into perfect alignment. "There you are," she whispered. "Uncle Richard was asking when you'd arrive." Of course he was. He'd always been punctual to a fault, a trait my sister had adored. It was one of many ways they'd been perfectly matched, both so devoted to keeping up appearances. "How's Marcus doing?" I asked, scanning the crowd for my nephew. Rebecca's eyes darted toward a corner where Marcus stood, shoulders hunched beneath his dark suit, looking every bit the reluctant heir to the Blackwood legacy. At 35, he carried the weight of his father's expectations like a physical burden. The prestigious law firm partnership, the calculated marriage to the daughter of a federal judge, the sprawling Tudor home in the right neighborhood, all boxes dutifully checked, all secretly suffocating him. "He's hardly said a word since we arrived," Rebecca murmured. "Vanessa is doing all the talking for both of them." I followed my daughter's gaze to Marcus's wife, who was expertly navigating a conversation with Catherine's garden club friends, her gestures measured, her smile precise. Catherine had handpicked her for Marcus, a fact my sister had mentioned with particular pride during our last strained Christmas dinner. "Perfect match," Catherine had declared, watching Vanessa charm the room. "She'll make an excellent mother to the next generation of Blackwoods." What Catherine never knew, what no one knew, was that I'd seen Marcus the week before that Christmas, drunk and despondent in a bar across town, confessing how deeply unhappy he was, how trapped he felt in the life that had been predetermined for him, how he was in love with someone else entirely. just one of many secrets I'd promised to keep. As we moved into the sanctuary, Richard approached, his expression a carefully composed mask of grief. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, the scent of expensive cologne mingling with something else. "Relief, perhaps?" "Elizabeth," he said, his voice appropriately subdued. "Thank you for being here. Catherine always valued family unity above all else." The sane irony of his statement nearly made me laugh. Family unity, the ultimate facade my sister had spent her life preserving at any cost. "Yes," I replied, meeting his gaze. "She certainly did." Something in my tone made his eyes narrow slightly. But decades of corporate negotiations had taught Richard when to retreat from potentially uncomfortable exchanges. He nodded curtly and moved to greet other arrivals, his hand resting briefly on the small of Vanessa's back as he passed, a gesture so quick I almost missed it. Almost. The memorial service proceeded with the polished efficiency Catherine would have demanded. Hymns were sung with appropriate reverence, eulogies delivered with carefully measured emotion. Richard spoke of their blessed union of 3 decades, his voice catching at just the right moments. Catherine's closest friend Margaret reminisced about their charitable work, painting my sister as a selfless community pillar. Throughout it all, I sat silent in the front pew, the manila folder burning a hole in my handbag, while memories flooded back unbidden. Catherine at 23, her voice ice cold as she cornered me in our parents' kitchen. "You will end this disgusting affair, Elizabeth. Richard is going to be my husband. It was just one night for him, a mistake. If you ever breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Catherine at 35, her perfectly manicured hand gripping my wrist so tight it left marks. "I've given you everything, the job at Richard's firm, the connections, the social standing. Without me, you would be nothing. Remember that before you start getting ideas about telling Marcus who his real mother is." Catherine at 50, her eyes narrowing as she watched my interaction with her husband at her elaborate birthday celebration. "I see the way you still look at him, Elizabeth. After all these years. Pathetic. Remember our arrangement. Remember what you stand to lose." The minister's voice pulled me from my memories. And now, Catherine's sister Elizabeth would like to say a few words. This wasn't part of the program. I'd made the request privately, and Richard had been too concerned with appearances to deny a grieving sister this final gesture. After all, what harm could come from a few sentimental words? The weight of every eye in the cathedral pressed against me as I made my way to the pulpit, manila folder in hand. Rebecca looked confused. I hadn't told her I would be speaking. Marcus watched with mild curiosity, while Richard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly from polite attention to something resembling wariness. He always was more perceptive than my sister gave him credit for. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. My sister Catherine was many things to many people: a devoted wife, a loving mother, a pillar of the community. I paused, letting my gaze drift over the gathering. So many faces, all composed in identical masks of appropriate mourning. How Catherine would have approved. But there was another Catherine, one that few of you knew. A slight rustling moved through the pews. Richard sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. My sister believed in preserving appearances above all else. The perfect family, the perfect marriage, the perfect life. I opened the folder, removing the first document. But perfection, as we all know, is rarely more than an illusion. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression changing from polite boredom to genuine interest. Catherine and I made a pact 34 years ago. A pact sealed with threats, blackmail, and a twisted sense of family loyalty. Today, I'm breaking that pact. Richard stood abruptly. "Elizabeth, this is hardly the time or place." "Sit down, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the sanctuary with unexpected authority. For once in your life, you're going to listen. Whether it was shock at my tone or genuine curiosity about what would come next, he slowly lowered himself back to the pew. What few of you know is that before Catherine married Richard, he and I had a brief relationship. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. A relationship that resulted in a pregnancy. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes widening as they fixed on me. Beside him, Vanessa's perfectly composed expression began to crack. Catherine discovered our affair and gave me an ultimatum. I would disappear for 9 months, give birth in secret, and then hand my baby over to her and Richard to raise as their own. In exchange, she would ensure I had a comfortable life, a job at Richard's firm, and most importantly, access to my child, though never as his mother. The sanctuary had gone completely silent. Even the rain against the stained glass seemed to pause. "Marcus," I said, looking directly at my son for the first time without pretense, "I am your biological mother." The pages in my hand trembled slightly as I held up the original birth certificate, preserved for 3 decades in that manila folder. Catherine was not able to have children, a fact she concealed from everyone, including Richard. She orchestrated this entire deception to create the perfect family she desperately wanted. Marcus stood slowly, his face drained of color. This can't be true." Richard remained seated, his expression unreadable, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "There's more," I continued, unable to stop now that the floodgates had opened. "Rebecca is not my biological daughter. She is Catherine's." Now, Rebecca rose, confusion and anger battling across her features. "Mom, what are you saying?" "When I was 30, I fell in love with a man named Thomas Grant. Catherine discovered our relationship and saw an opportunity. She had been having an affair with Richard's business partner, James Sullivan, and found herself pregnant. To hide her infidelity, she forced me to pretend the pregnancy was mine. She sent Thomas away, convincing him I had betrayed him. 9 months later, Rebecca was born, and I raised her as my own, never telling her the truth about her parentage. The sanctuary erupted in gasps and whispers. Rebecca sank back into her seat, hands covering her face, while Marcus remained standing, his gaze darting between Richard and me. For 34 years, I've kept these secrets. I've watched my son grow up calling another woman mother. I've raised my sister's daughter as my own. I've maintained the elaborate web of lies Catherine created because I was afraid. Afraid of losing the children I loved. Afraid of the power she held over me. I closed the folder, suddenly exhausted. Catherine died believing her secrets would follow her to the grave. She underestimated the weight of truth and how desperately it fights to be free. Richard finally stood, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. "That's enough, Elizabeth. You've disgraced yourself and Catherine's memory with these fabrications." "They're not fabrications, Richard," I replied calmly. "And you know it. You've always known it. You chose to look the other way because the truth was too inconvenient, too messy for the perfect life you and Catherine had constructed." I turned back to the stunned congregation. I don't expect forgiveness for my part in this deception. I made choices, terrible choices, that hurt people I love. But I couldn't let Catherine's carefully constructed lies become her legacy. Not anymore. The manila folder contained more evidence: letters, medical records, DNA test results I had secretly obtained years ago, but I realized I didn't need them. The truth hung in the air, palpable and undeniable. "Marcus," I said softly, "you once told me you felt like you were living someone else's life. Perhaps now you understand why." His eyes, so like his father's, held mine for a long moment before he nodded almost imperceptibly. I stepped away from the pulpit, the weight of 3 decades of silence finally lifting from my shoulders. As I walked down the center aisle, past shocked faces and whispered conversations. I didn't look back. The Blackwood family facade had finally shattered, and what would emerge from the ruins remained to be seen. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt clean, washed new. For the first time in 34 years, I could breathe without the pressure of secrets constricting my chest. Whatever came next, the anger, the recriminations, the painful conversations that would surely follow, I would face them in truth. The church doors opened behind me. Footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then more determined. Elizabeth. I turned to find Richard standing there, his perfect composure finally cracked. For a moment, neither of us spoke. 34 years of complicated history stretching between us like a chasm. "Why now?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "After all these years, why destroy everything now?" I studied the man I had once loved, the father of my child, a participant in the elaborate charade that had shaped all our lives. "Because Catherine isn't here to stop me anymore," I replied simply. "And because Marcus and Rebecca deserve to know who they really are before they spend their lives becoming what others expect them to be." His eyes closed briefly, a flash of something like recognition crossing his features. When he looked at me again, I saw resignation there, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of relief. "Marcus is asking for you," he said finally. "And Rebecca," he paused, the reality of his non-biological relationship with her seemingly hitting him anew. "Rebecca hasn't stopped crying." I nodded, steeling myself for what would come next. "I'll talk to them." "What happens now?" Richard asked, suddenly looking older than his 64 years. "Now," I said, "we tell the truth, all of it, no matter how painful." Behind him, the church doors opened again. Marcus emerged, his face a storm of emotions, Rebecca beside him, her eyes red-rimmed and questioning. My children, one I had given away, one I had taken in, both casualties of Catherine's obsession with creating the perfect family facade. As they approached, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The hardest part was done. The truth, with all its jagged edges and painful revelations, was finally free. Now we would learn if that truth could indeed set us free, or if some wounds were too deep to ever truly heal. The church's private meeting. Room felt too small for the magnitude of what had just transpired. Wood-paneled walls closed in around us, the air thick with decades of unspoken truths. The minister had discreetly offered this space, away from the shocked mourners now undoubtedly dissecting every word of my revelation over coffee and stale cookies in the fellowship hall. Marcus paced the perimeter of the antique conference table, his expensive Italian shoes striking a rhythmic counterpoint to the grandfather clock's solemn ticking. Rebecca sat rigid in a high-backed chair, her makeup streaked from crying, yet somehow still maintaining the poised dignity Catherine had drilled into her since childhood. Richard stood by the window, his back to us all, shoulders bearing the unmistakable tension of a man whose carefully controlled world had just imploded. No one had spoken for nearly 5 minutes. I placed the manila folder on the table, spreading out its contents: birth certificates, medical records, letters, the DNA test results I'd secretly obtained years ago using Marcus's discarded coffee cup, and a strand of Rebecca's hair from a brush she'd left at my home. "You've known all this time?" Marcus finally broke the silence, his voice unnervingly calm, addressing the window where Richard's reflection stared blankly at the churchyard below. Richard didn't turn. "Not everything." "But enough," Marcus pressed, stopping his pacing to lean against the table, knuckles white against the polished mahogany. "Enough to know I wasn't—" His voice caught. "That mother wasn't my mother." I flinched at how the word mother seemed to physically pain him now. Rebecca noticed, her red-rimmed eyes narrowing as she studied my reaction. "How could you?" she whispered. addressing me directly for the first time since I'd shattered her reality. How could you raise me knowing I wasn't yours? That everything was a lie? Because I loved you, I answered simply, the inadequacy of those words hanging in the air between us. From the moment they placed you in my arms, you were mine. Biology be damned. Rebecca's jaw tightened, that familiar tension I'd seen 1,000 times before, but now recognized with painful clarity as Catherine's genetic inheritance. Were you ever going to tell us? If she hadn't died? No, I admitted, the stark truth, of it a strange relief after so many years of deception. The arrangement was meant to go to our graves. Arrangement, Marcus repeated, the word dripping with disgust. That's what we were to you all? An arrangement? Richard finally turned from the window, his face ashen. It wasn't like that, son. Don't call me that, Marcus snapped, with a vehemence that made us all flinch. You don't get to call me that right now. The room fell silent again, the weight of 34 years of lies pressing down on us all. I want to understand, Rebecca, said finally, her analytical mind, another trait unmistakably from Catherine, already trying to reorganize this new reality into something comprehensible. Start from the beginning. All of it. I drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of Richard's gaze. This was the moment I'd rehearsed countless times, yet now the carefully practiced words dissolved on my tongue. Your mother, Catherine, and I were never close. Even as children, I began, the distant past somehow easier to voice than more recent deceits. She was always the perfect one, poised, ambitious, determined. I was the dreamer, the disappointment according to our parents. When Catherine set her sights on Richard at a charity gala in 1988, it was a foregone conclusion that she would have him. He was everything she wanted: wealthy family, Harvard education, political connections. Richard cleared his throat, but said nothing, his eyes fixed on his perfectly polished shoes. What Catherine didn't know was that Richard and I had already met months before, through mutual friends. We'd been seeing each other quietly. Nothing serious yet, but... I paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. We connected. Richard finished for me, his voice soft with memory. Elizabeth was nothing like anyone I'd met in our social circle. She saw through all the pretense, made me laugh, challenged me. Marcus made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a groan. So, you were sleeping with both sisters? Classy. No, Richard and I said simultaneously. I continued alone. When Catherine set her sights on Richard, I stepped aside. She was my sister, and she always got what she wanted. I told Richard we needed to end things. But we met one last time, Richard added, a muscle working in his jaw, to say goodbye. 9 weeks later, I realized I was pregnant, I said. The memory of that cold bathroom floor and the positive pregnancy test still vivid after all these years. I was terrified, alone. Catherine and Richard were already engaged. The wedding was 3 months away. Rebecca leaned forward, her analyst's mind connecting dots. So you told Catherine? I didn't have to, I said bitterly. She'd been watching me like a hawk. She noticed I wasn't drinking at our parents' anniversary dinner. She followed me to my doctor's appointment. I closed my eyes briefly against the memory of Catherine's face that day, the cold fury as she cornered me in the parking garage. She knew immediately the baby was Richard's. And that's when she came up with this arrangement? Marcus asked, the last word still venomous on his tongue. I nodded slowly. Catherine couldn't have children. She'd known since she was 23, premature, ovarian failure. She never told anyone, not even Richard. Her plan was to use donor eggs eventually, but then I presented her with a convenient solution. Jesus Christ, Marcus muttered, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Richard's that it physically pained me to witness. She gave me an ultimatum, I continued, the words coming easier now, like poison finally drawing from a wound. I would disappear for the duration of the pregnancy, give birth in a private facility she arranged in Vermont, and then surrender the baby, you, Marcus, to her and Richard. She would announce to everyone that she'd had a difficult pregnancy, requiring bed rest away from prying eyes. In exchange, she would ensure I had financial security and, most importantly, access to you as your aunt. And if you refused? Rebecca asked quietly. Catherine threatened to destroy me completely. She had evidence of a youthful indiscretion that would have devastated our parents, cost me my job, possibly even resulted in criminal charges. I swallowed hard. It wasn't just empty threats. Catherine always had contingency plans. Richard finally sat down heavily in a chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I never knew any of this. Catherine told me she was pregnant 2 months after our wedding. I had no reason to doubt her. You never questioned the timing? Marcus demanded. Never wondered why there were no pictures of her pregnant? Why no one was allowed to visit during her difficult pregnancy? It was a different time, Richard replied weakly. Men weren't expected to be involved in pregnancy details. Catherine handled everything, as she always did. And then suddenly, there you were, this perfect, beautiful boy, my son. His voice broke on the last word. Marcus turned away, visibly struggling for composure. And Rebecca? He asked after a moment, turning toward his cousin. No, his half-sister, I reminded myself. Another tangled thread in Catherine's web. I looked at my daughter, because regardless of biology, that's what she would always be to me, and felt my heart fracture at the pain in her eyes. 11 years passed, I continued softly. I built a life around the parameters Catherine had set. I took the job she arranged at the legal firm connected to Richard's company. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. My life revolved around the precious time I was allowed with Marcus, though always as Aunt Elizabeth. I traced a pattern on the table's surface, avoiding everyone's eyes. Then I met Thomas Grant at a publishing conference in Chicago. He was brilliant, kind, unconnected to our social circle. For the first time, I felt like I could have something real, something just for me. My biological father, Rebecca said, not a question but a confirmation. No, I corrected gently. Thomas wasn't your biological father. He was the man I loved, who Catherine drove away when she discovered our relationship. Your biological father was James Sullivan. Richard's head snapped up. James? My former partner? Catherine was having an affair with him, I said, the words still bitter after all these years. When she realized she was pregnant, she panicked. Richard would know the child couldn't be his. They had barely been intimate for months, according to what she told me. That much was true, Richard muttered, a flush creeping up his neck. So she crafted another solution, I continued. She told me I would claim to be pregnant from my relationship with Thomas. She sent him evidence, fabricated, that I had been unfaithful to him. He left, heartbroken, believing I had betrayed him. Catherine arranged for me to appear pregnant in public while she hid her own condition. When you were born, Rebecca, you were immediately given to me to raise. Rebecca's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. So Catherine, my actual mother, was right there all along, watching you raise me, playing the doting aunt while actually being my mother? Yes, I whispered. That was the arrangement. She maintained her perfect marriage, her perfect reputation. She had her son, and now I had a daughter I was permitted to actually raise, to love openly. While she held everything over your head, Marcus finished, his litigator's mind connecting. The pieces. She kept you under her control with threats about Marcus's paternity and Rebecca's true parentage. I nodded, exhausted by the unburdening of secrets I'd carried for so long. If I stepped out of line, she would take you both away from me completely. The legal documentation was ironclad. She made sure of that. Richard stood suddenly, moving to the table to examine the DNA test results I'd covertly obtained years ago. When did you confirm all this? These tests are dated 2015. After Marcus got engaged, I admitted. Something about seeing him commit to a future built on lies. I needed to be certain. 8 years, Rebecca whispered. You've known with absolute certainty for 8 years and said nothing. I was a coward, I acknowledged, the admission surprisingly freeing. I told myself I was protecting you both, but the truth is, I was protecting myself too, from your anger, from losing you, from facing the consequences of the choices I made. Marcus picked up his birth certificate, the original one listing me as his mother, and studied it as if it were evidence in a trial. Does Vanessa know any of this? I hesitated, looking at Richard. No, Richard answered for me. No one knew except Catherine, Elizabeth, and eventually me. You knew? Marcus rounded on his father, not his father, Richard. When? Richard's shoulders sagged. I suspected something wasn't right when Rebecca was born. The timing of Elizabeth's relationship with Thomas, Catherine's sudden interest, in making Elizabeth the godmother of both children, certain comments Catherine made when she thought I wasn't listening. When Rebecca was about 5, I confronted Catherine. And, I prompted, this part of the story unknown even to me. She denied everything at first, then when I persisted, she threatened to take you away. He looked directly at Marcus. She had documentation showing I was unfit, fabricated evidence of drinking problems, gambling debts, affairs. She promised if I ever breathed a word of my suspicions, I would lose you and everything else. The weight of this new revelation settled over the room. Catherine's web of control had been even more extensive than I'd realized. So you both just went along with it, Rebecca said, her voice hardening. Year after year, lie after lie. We did, I admitted. There's no justification that will ever make that right. What about James Sullivan? Marcus asked suddenly. Does he know about Rebecca? Richard shook his head. James moved to Singapore after dissolving our partnership in 2002. As far as I know, Catherine never told him. Rebecca stood abruptly, straightening her black dress with shaking hands. I need some air. Rebecca, please. I reached for her hand, but she recoiled from my touch. Don't, she said, her voice breaking. Just don't touch me right now. She walked to the door, her composure visibly hanging by a thread. With her hand on the doorknob, she paused without turning. Were you ever going to tell us if she hadn't died? Would we have lived our entire lives not knowing who we really are? The question hung in the air, demanding an honesty I owed her. No, I whispered. The secret would have died with us. Rebecca's shoulders stiffened, and without another word, she left the room. Marcus stared at the documents spread across the table, tracing the edge of his birth certificate with a manicured fingertip. I always felt like something was wrong, he said quietly. Like I was living someone else's life. Marcus, Richard began, but Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. Were you ever going to tell me about Harvard? The question, seemingly out of nowhere, made Richard pale. What? Senior year. When I told you I wanted to study music composition instead of law. When I showed you my acceptance letter to Berklee College of Music alongside the Harvard law admission. Marcus's voice was frighteningly calm. You and Mother, Catherine, told me I was throwing my life away, that no Blackwood would waste their potential on something as frivolous as music, that Blackwoods were Harvard men, generation after generation. He looked up, his eyes meeting Richard's. But I'm not really a Blackwood, am I? That legacy you've been suffocating me with my entire life was never actually mine. Richard looked stricken. Marcus, regardless of biology, you're my son. Don't, Marcus snapped. Don't pretend this changes nothing. He gathered the documents methodically, his lawyer's precision evident even in crisis, and placed them back in the manila folder. "I'm going to check on Rebecca. She shouldn't be alone right now." As he reached the door, he paused, turning back to look at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "For what it's worth, I always felt closer to you than to her. I never understood why. I guess now I do." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Richard and me alone with 34 years of shared deception between us. "You should have told me you were pregnant," Richard said after a long moment, his voice barely audible. "Back then, before the wedding." "Would it have changed anything?" I asked, truly curious after all these years. "Would you have left Catherine for me?" Richard's hesitation was answer enough. That's what I thought. I stood, suddenly desperate to escape this room, these memories. Catherine knew that too. She knew exactly what everyone would sacrifice to maintain the perfect image. "She loved them, Elizabeth," Richard said quietly. "In her own way, she loved Marcus and Rebecca. Whatever her motivations at the beginning, I watched her love them for 30 years. An unexpected sob caught in my throat. I know. That was the cruelest part. Watching her be a mother to my son. Watching her orchestrate every aspect of his life. Knowing that whatever love I gave Rebecca, there was always Catherine, watching, judging, reminding me that everything I had was at her mercy. Richard crossed the room slowly, stopping just short of where I stood. For a moment, I saw echoes of the young man I had loved so briefly, before Catherine, before the decades of deception, before life had carved disappointment into the lines around his eyes. "What do we do now?" he asked, the question hanging between us like a live wire. I thought of Marcus and Rebecca, out there somewhere in the church grounds, their identities unraveling and reforming in the wake of my revelations. I thought of the mourners still lingering. In the fellowship hall, the news undoubtedly spreading like wildfire through Catherine's carefully cultivated social circle. I thought of the years ahead, holidays, weddings, perhaps grandchildren someday, all forever altered by this day's truths. "Now we face the consequences," I said simply. "All of them." Richard nodded slowly, the reality of what lay ahead settling on his shoulders. "Marcus won't speak to me for a long time, perhaps ever. Rebecca may never forgive me," I acknowledged, the pain of that possibility acute. "But they deserve to live without lies, even if that means they choose to live without us." A knock at the door interrupted us. The minister entered, his expression carefully neutral, the practiced face of a man accustomed to family drama, though perhaps not quite of this magnitude. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said gently. "But the caterers at the reception venue are asking about proceeding with the memorial luncheon. Many guests have departed early, but there are still some who are waiting for direction." Richard. And I exchanged a glance, the absurdity of continuing with Catherine's meticulously planned memorial reception after what had just transpired striking us both simultaneously. "Cancel it," Richard said decisively. "Donate the food to a shelter. Send everyone home." The minister nodded, clearly relieved. "Very good, sir. And—" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Your children asked me to inform you they've left together. Marcus said not to wait for them at the house." After the minister departed, Richard and I stood in charged silence, the magnitude of what had been set in motion hanging heavy between us. "She would have hated this, you know," Richard said finally, a hint of something like grim humor in his voice. "Catherine's perfectly orchestrated memorial service ending in scandal and canceled reception. Her worst nightmare." "Yes," I agreed, gathering my purse, suddenly bone-weary. "But Catherine isn't here anymore, and the rest of us deserve to finally live in truth, whatever that means for us now." As we left the church, the late afternoon sun cut through the dispersing clouds, casting long shadows across the emptying parking lot. Catherine's memorial flowers still adorned the sanctuary steps, their arranged perfection now seeming garish and hollow. Richard paused beside his Bentley. "Where will you go now?" "Home," I said simply. "To wait. They'll have questions when the initial shock wears off. More than we could answer today." He nodded, a lifetime of unspoken words passing between us. "For what it's worth, Elizabeth, I did love you. Back then, before everything got so twisted," I finished for him. "I know, but love without courage is worth very little in the end, isn't it?" I turned and walked to my own modest sedan parked at the far end of the lot, leaving Richard standing alone beside his luxury car, Catherine's perfectly planned life crumbling around him like the church flower arrangements that would soon wilt and fade. In my rearview mirror, I watched him grow smaller as I drove away. The man I once loved, the father of my son, my sister's husband, all those complicated truths now exposed to the harsh light of day after decades in shadow. I had no illusions about what lay ahead. The path forward would be painful, messy, uncertain. Marcus and Rebecca might never fully forgive the deception that had shaped their lives. Richard might retreat further into his carefully constructed world, or perhaps, finally freed from Catherine's manipulations, find his way to an authentic life. As for me, I had cast off 34 years of secrets like a weight I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten how to stand straight without it. Whatever came next, rejection, forgiveness, something in between, I would face it honestly. Catherine's legacy of perfect appearances had died with her. The truth, in all its brutal, liberating reality, was finally free. And so, perhaps, were we all. 3 days of silence followed the memorial service. 3 days of jumping whenever my phone buzzed, only to find routine spam or hesitant messages from mutual acquaintances fishing for details about the incident at Catherine's service. 3 days of watching my landline for the blinking red light that never came. On the 4th morning, I woke to find Catherine's lawyer, Herbert Donovan, waiting on my front porch at 7 a.m., his silver BMW conspicuous in my modest neighborhood. "Elizabeth," he greeted me with the practiced neutrality of a man who'd navigated 4 decades of high society divorces and inheritance disputes. "May I come in?" His Brooks Brothers suit looked out of place in my cluttered living room. I hadn't bothered to clean since returning from the memorial service. Dirty teacups and half-read books scattered across surfaces like artifacts of a life suddenly interrupted. "Catherine left instructions," Herbert said without preamble, opening his leather portfolio. "In the event that you ever, and I'm quoting directly here, violate the terms of our arrangement." Of course she had. Catherine's contingency plans always had contingency plans. "Let me guess," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "She's reaching from beyond the grave to punish me? Take away the house? The modest trust fund that kept me compliant all these years?" Herbert's expression remained neutral, but something like discomfort flickered behind his gold-rimmed glasses. "Actually, no." He slid a sealed envelope across my coffee table. The paper was expensive, cream-colored stationery embossed with Catherine's monogram in silver. She instructed me to deliver this to you personally, should certain revelations ever come to light. Along with this. He removed a small wooden box from his briefcase, the dark mahogany polished to a high shine. "What is it?" I asked, making no move to touch either item. "I don't know the contents of the letter. As for the box..." He hesitated, professional detachment momentarily cracking. "Catherine had me retrieve it from a safe deposit box last year when her diagnosis became terminal. She was different that day, agitated, not her usual composed self." I stared at the innocuous-looking items, my wariness giving way to curiosity. "Is that all?" Herbert cleared his throat. "There's a legal matter as well. Contrary to what you might expect, Catherine's will remains unchanged despite your disclosures. The financial provisions she made for you stand. The trust continues. The house remains yours. Why? The question escaped before I could contain it. Herbert packed his portfolio with methodical precision. That wasn't for me to ask. I simply execute my client's wishes. He stood, straightening, his already impeccable tie. I've fulfilled my obligation. What you do with her final communication is, of course, entirely your choice. After he left, I sat staring at the envelope and box for nearly an hour, as if they might detonate if handled carelessly. Finally, I picked up the envelope, breaking the wax seal that bore Catherine's distinctive CB monogram. The handwriting inside was unmistakably hers, elegant cursive penned with the Mont Blanc fountain pen she'd carried since law school. The B's ink was emerald green, her signature color. Elizabeth, if you're reading this, you've finally found your spine. Or perhaps I'm simply dead and beyond retaliation. Either way, the truth our family so carefully buried has resurfaced at last. I won't insult your intelligence with apologies. We both know I would make the same choices again. Everything I did was necessary to create and preserve the life I deserved. The life we both deserved, though you never had the ambition to claim it for yourself. I've instructed Herbert to ensure your financial security remains intact, regardless of what truths you may have revealed in a moment of misguided conscience or revenge. Not from any sense of sisterly affection, but because at this point, your poverty would reflect poorly on the Blackwood name. Appearances, as I've always maintained, are paramount. The box contains items you may find illuminating. Our parents were not the upstanding citizens they pretended to be, nor was our childhood the idyllic fantasy they constructed in family Christmas letters. I protected you from certain truths, Elizabeth, not out of kindness, but necessity. Some secrets serve a purpose beyond mere deception. Perhaps understanding our beginnings will help you comprehend my endings, or perhaps not. Either way, the choice to open that particular Pandora's box now rests with you. I imagine Marcus and Rebecca are struggling with their new reality. You may tell them, if you wish, that despite the unconventional circumstances of their origins, I did love them, in my own way, on my own terms. That much, at least, was never a lie. We will not meet again, sister. Make of your remaining years what you will. Catherine, no signature beyond her name. No closing sentiment. Nothing to soften the cold calculation of her final communication. My hands trembled as I set down the letter. Even from the grave, Catherine maintained her perfect composure, her unapologetic commitment to the life she'd engineered through manipulation and threats. The wooden box sat on my coffee table, its brass hinges gleaming in the morning light filtering through my curtains. Whatever secrets it contained had been important enough for Catherine to ensure I received them after her death. Yet only if I had broken our decades-long pact of silence. Before I could decide whether to open it, my phone rang. For the first time in 4 days, the screen displayed a name I recognized, Marcus. Hello? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, tentative in a way I'd never been with him before. Elizabeth. He still couldn't bring himself to call me mother, and I couldn't blame him. We need to talk. Both of us do. Rebecca and me. Of course, I said, relief washing over me despite the formal coolness of his tone. When? Tonight, 7 o'clock, at Rebecca's apartment. He paused. Richard won't be there. I understand. Do you? The question hung between us, layers of meaning embedded in those two simple words. I'm trying to, I answered honestly. After we hung up, I returned to the mysterious box, running my fingertips over its polished surface. Whatever it contained had shaped Catherine in ways that influenced all our lives. But did I want to understand my sister better now, when the damage was already done? Perhaps understanding was the only path forward. I opened the latch. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, lay a collection of items that initially seemed unrelated. A small, leather-bound journal with a broken clasp, a tarnished silver locket, a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, several faded photographs, and an envelope containing what appeared to be legal documents. The journal, I discovered, belonged to our mother. The dates spanned from 1960 to 1963, when she was just 23 to 26 years old, before either Catherine or I were born. The handwriting was neat but hurried, as if the words had been captured in stolen moments. As I began to read, the carefully crafted mythology of our family began to unravel. Our parents hadn't met at Yale as they'd always claimed. Our mother, Eleanor, had been a secretary at a law firm where our father, William, was already a junior partner. He was married to someone else when they began their affair, a woman named Margaret who suffered from what the journal described as melancholia and had been institutionalized several times. When Eleanor became pregnant with Catherine, William paid a significant sum to his first wife's family to facilitate a quiet divorce. The pregnancy was concealed, the timeline adjusted, a hasty wedding arranged, and Catherine was presented to the world as a honeymoon baby, born a convenient month premature, but miraculously robust. Our entire family origin was built on deception, constructed to preserve appearances and social standing. But there was more. The newspaper clippings revealed a scandal our parents had successfully buried. William had been involved in a financial impropriety at his firm, nothing that reached criminal charges, but enough to destroy his reputation had it become public knowledge. The silver locket contained a small photo of a woman who resembled our mother enough to be her sister, but according to the accompanying note, this was Eleanor's cousin Judith, who had apparently been erased from family history after becoming pregnant out of wedlock and being sent to a home for unwed mothers. The legal documents were the most revealing and the most damning. They detailed a trust established by our maternal grandfather, with very specific conditions. His substantial fortune would pass only to female heirs who upheld the family's reputation through appropriate marriages and lifestyles. Any woman who failed to maintain these standards would be disinherited. Suddenly, Catherine's pathological obsession with appearances made perfect, terrible sense. She had known all of this, had discovered these family secrets, perhaps during our parents' decline when she'd managed their affairs with characteristic efficiency. She'd understood that our family's position, wealth, and social standing were built entirely on carefully maintained facades, and she had learned the lesson well. Too well. I closed the box, my mind reeling. Our parents had taught Catherine, intentionally or not, that deception was necessary, that appearances trumped truth, that family legacy was worth any moral compromise. And she had simply continued their tradition, expanding it to include manipulating me, Richard, Marcus, and Rebecca. Legacy of lies, generation after generation. The question now was whether I would continue to participate in that legacy, or whether the truth, finally aired, could break the pattern for Marcus and Rebecca. I arrived at Rebecca's elegant brownstone precisely at 7, the wooden box tucked under my arm. Whatever came next, they deserved to know the complete truth, not just about their own origins, but about the generations of deception that had shaped us all. Rebecca opened the door herself, her expression guarded. She'd lost weight in just 4 days, her collarbones prominent beneath her cashmere sweater. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, though her makeup was, as always, impeccable. "You came," she said, as if she'd half expected me to back out. Of course I did. The apartment reflected Rebecca's personality, tasteful but not ostentatious, books, arranged by color on built-in shelves, original art on the walls by emerging artists she'd discovered at small galleries. Catherine had always considered it quaint, compared to the Blackwood family estate. Another subtle way she'd undermined the daughter she'd given away. Marcus sat in the living room, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He'd loosened his tie, but otherwise remained in his work clothes, as if maintaining some tenuous connection to normalcy through routine. "Vanessa is staying with her sister," he said in lieu of greeting. "She's processing." I nodded, setting the box on Rebecca's coffee table. "I understand. It's a lot to absorb." "That's one way to put it," Rebecca said, pouring herself a glass of wine without offering me one. The small snub spoke volumes about where we stood. "I received something from Catherine today," I said, cutting directly to the point. "Through her lawyer." "I think you both should see it." Marcus leaned forward. "What is it?" "Context," I replied. "For all of this, it doesn't excuse anything, but it helps explain patterns." I opened the box, showing them the contents, the journal, the clippings, the documents. As succinctly as possible, I related what I'd discovered about our family's hidden history, watching their expressions shift from skepticism to shock to a reluctant understanding. "So this lineage of deception," Marcus said slowly, "it goes back generations." "At least 2 before Catherine," I confirmed. "Possibly more." Rebecca picked up our grandmother's locket, turning it over in her hands. "You're saying Catherine learned this behavior, that she was conditioned to value appearances over truth?" "I'm saying she was raised in an environment where deception was normalized, even rewarded," I clarified. "It doesn't excuse what she did to any of us, but it does place it in a context." "And you?" Marcus asked, his eyes sharp. "What's your excuse? You participated in this charade for 34 years. The question hit like a physical blow, though I'd been expecting it. "I have no excuse, only explanations that sound increasingly hollow with each passing year." I met his gaze directly. "I was young, terrified, and Catherine held all the power. But I could have fought harder, should have fought harder. For you, for all of us." The silence that followed was heavy with 3 decades of lost possibilities. "I've spoken with Vanessa," Marcus said finally. "She wants a divorce." The statement hung in the air, another casualty of truth. "I'm sorry," I said inadequately. "Don't be," he replied, draining his glass. "She said something that resonated. If our marriage was arranged to continue a lie, what's the point of maintaining it now that the truth is known?" Rebecca's hand covered her brother's, half-brother's, briefly. "Marcus has been staying with me. We've been talking. A lot." "We never really knew each other," Marcus added. "Not as adults. Catherine always kept us at a polite distance. Now we know why." "She was afraid we might compare notes," Rebecca said bitterly. "Recognize similarities that couldn't be explained?" "By being cousins." I studied them sitting side by side, the son I'd surrendered, the daughter I'd raised as my own. Both Catherine's victims in different ways, both now adrift in a sea of newly discovered truths. "I found Thomas," Rebecca said abruptly. "Catherine's old letters mentioned he moved to Seattle. He's teaching literature at a university there." My heart constricted. Thomas, the only man I'd truly loved after Richard. The man Catherine had driven away with fabricated evidence of infidelity when she needed me to claim her pregnancy as my own. "He never married," Rebecca continued, watching my reaction carefully. "I haven't contacted him yet, but I could, if you wanted me to." The offer hung between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first tentative step toward something new between us. "That's complicated," I managed. "He believes I betrayed him, lied to him." "You did lie to him," Marcus pointed out, his lawyer's precision cutting through emotion. "By omission, at least. By allowing him to believe Rebecca was your child with another man." "Yes," I acknowledged. "Another choice I made under duress that hurt someone innocent." Rebecca studied me, Catherine's analytical nature evident in her assessment. "Why did you tell us now, after all these years? You could have taken these secrets to your grave." Catherine was gone. No one would ever have known. It was the question at the heart of everything. Why now? Why this way? Why at all? Because I watched what secrets did to Catherine, I said slowly, finding the truth as I spoke it. She built her entire identity around maintaining them. They consumed her. In the end, she was more curator of appearances than an actual person. And I saw the same happening to both of you. I looked at Marcus. You, in a marriage and career chosen to fulfill the Blackwood legacy rather than your own dreams. Then, at Rebecca. You, always searching for approval from a woman who gave you away, never understanding why you felt so disconnected from your supposed heritage. So this was… what? An act of mercy? Marcus asked, skepticism evident. Self-preservation. Partially, I admitted. I couldn't bear the weight anymore. But also, hope. Hope that knowing the truth might free you both to live authentically in ways Catherine and I never did. Rebecca set down her wine glass with deliberate care. I keep thinking about all those Sunday dinners at Catherine's house. The way she would correct my posture, my speech, my opinions. How nothing I did was ever quite right. Her voice caught. She was my mother, critiquing me as if I were some defective copy of herself, while never allowing me to know why I mattered. So much to her. And I kept trying to feel something, anything genuine toward her, Marcus added. Everyone told me how fortunate I was to have such an accomplished, devoted mother. But there was always this distance, this sense that I was a project rather than a person to her. The pain in their voices was palpable, decades of confusion finally contextualized, but not healed. What happens now? I asked quietly, the question that had haunted me since the memorial service. Marcus exchanged a glance with Rebecca before answering. Rebecca has accepted a visiting professorship in Seattle for the next academic year. I'm taking a sabbatical. From the firm, indefinite leave, actually. I've enrolled in a music composition course at the community college as a starting point. The magnitude of these changes, these steps toward authentic lives, left me momentarily speechless. And Richard? I finally asked. Dad? Marcus paused, the word clearly complicated for him now. Richard and I have spoken briefly. He's struggling. The foundation of his life has collapsed. The firm is in chaos with rumors spreading. He's considering early retirement. What about you? Rebecca asked, addressing me directly. What will you do now? It was a question I hadn't fully considered, having been so focused on the immediate aftermath of revelation. I don't know, I admitted. For 34 years, my life has revolved around maintaining Catherine's arrangements. Without those constraints, I trailed off, the possibilities simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. You could write that novel you always talked about, Rebecca said, surprising me with the reference to dreams I'd mentioned years ago, never thinking she'd remembered. Or travel. You always wanted to see Kyoto during cherry blossom season. The fact that she recalled these details of my suppressed hopes struck me deeply. Perhaps she had seen me more clearly than I'd realized. I told Vanessa everything, Marcus said suddenly. About the arrangement, about you being my biological mother, about Rebecca and me being half-siblings rather than cousins. He twisted his wedding band, still on his finger, though clearly not, for much longer. She said something I can't stop thinking about. She asked if all the lies had actually trapped everyone. Not just the people being lied to, but the liars themselves. I considered this insight from a woman I'd only known as my nephew's perfectly suitable wife, chosen by Catherine for her social connections rather than any genuine compatibility with Marcus. She's right, I said softly. Catherine constructed a perfect prison and locked us all inside it, herself included. She spent her entire life terrified that someone would discover the truth and destroy everything she'd built. And you? Rebecca pressed. Were you trapped too? Or were you a willing participant? The question demanded complete honesty, The kind I'd denied them for decades. Both, I admitted. I was coerced initially, but with each passing year, I became more complicit. I told myself I was protecting you both, but I was also protecting myself from the consequences of the original deception. Marcus nodded slowly, as if my answer confirmed something he'd already concluded. We're not ready to forgive you. Either. Of you. Not yet. I understand, I said, meaning it. I wouldn't expect that. But, Rebecca added, her voice softening slightly, we're not cutting you out of our lives either. That would just be another kind of lie. Pretending you don't exist. That this history doesn't exist. We need time, Marcus explained. Space to figure out who we are outside of Catherine's carefully constructed narratives. Outside of the Blackwood legacy. And then? I couldn't help asking. Then we see what's possible, Rebecca said simply. Without expectations, without pretense. It was more than I deserved and less than I hoped for. A tentative path forward without guarantees. As I prepared to leave, Rebecca handed me a small photograph she'd extracted from the wooden box, a picture I hadn't noticed earlier. It showed Catherine and me as children, perhaps 7 and 9 years old, sitting on a beach blanket, both laughing at something beyond the camera's view. I've never seen her look so unguarded, Rebecca said. Or you, for that matter. I studied the image of two sisters, not yet damaged by family legacies of deception, not yet entangled in webs of their own making. We were close once, I said, memories surfacing of a time before competition and resentment poisoned our relationship. Before she learned to value appearances over everything else. Before I learned to surrender rather than fight. Marcus touched the photograph gently. Patterns can be broken. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an acknowledgement of possibility. An opening where truth might eventually foster something authentic. As I left Rebecca's brownstone, the night air carried the first hint of spring beneath the lingering winter chill. Catherine was gone, her perfect facades shattered, her careful arrangements unraveled. In their place lay something messy, painful but real, a family confronting its true history, its members beginning to discover their authentic selves. The road ahead would be difficult. Some wounds might never fully heal. But for the first time, in 34 years, we were all breathing without the weight of secrets crushing our chests. The truth, with all its jagged edges and painful revelations, had indeed set us free. Not to perfect happiness, Catherine's elusive goal, but to something far more valuable. The chance to live honestly, whatever that might mean for each of us. Now. Autumn arrived with a swift certainty, the Boston Common ablaze with crimson and gold. 6 months had passed since Catherine's memorial service. 6 months of painful reckonings, cautious reconnections, and the slow dismantling of decades of carefully constructed facades. I sat on a park bench near the duck pond, watching families stroll by in the crisp October sunshine. My phone chimed with a text from Rebecca. Flight landed. Heading to hotel. Dinner still on for 7? Such a normal exchange, deceptively ordinary. Except nothing was ordinary about my daughter coming home after 6 months in Seattle, where she'd begun her visiting professorship and initiated contact with Thomas Grant, the man Catherine had driven from my life 23 years ago. Looking forward to it. Marcus confirmed too, I replied, my thumb hovering over the screen before adding, I've missed you. The response came quickly. Missed you too. See you tonight, small steps. Tentative truths, a new language we were learning together. The maple trees dropped golden leaves onto the path as I made my way back to my apartment. Not the modest house Catherine had generously provided as part of our arrangement, but a new place I'd chosen for myself, a light-filled space overlooking the Charles River. My first truly independent decision in decades. Richard had sold the Blackwood estate 3 months earlier, unable to live surrounded by physical reminders of the life Catherine had orchestrated. He'd moved to a sleek downtown condo, throwing himself into charitable work, genuine philanthropy, not the social status-building events Catherine had always prioritized. We met occasionally for coffee, two survivors of a shared catastrophe, carefully navigating our complicated connection without Catherine dictating the terms. A photograph of Marcus at the piano now held pride of place on my sideboard. He'd sent it somewhat hesitantly 2 months ago. An image of him performing at a small community recital, his face alight with a joy I'd rarely seen in him before. First public performance since high school, the accompanying text had read. Thought, you might want to see. It was the first personal gift he'd offered since learning I was his biological mother. My phone rang as I entered my apartment, a Seattle area code I now recognized. Elizabeth. Thomas's voice still carried that slight Northwestern accent, soft consonants and open vowels. Rebecca mentioned you were having dinner tonight. I wanted to wish you all well. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined having regular conversations with Thomas Grant. The literature professor Catherine had systematically removed from my life, with fabricated evidence of infidelity, when she needed me to claim her pregnancy as my own. Thank you, I replied, setting down my keys. How are things with you? A loaded question for a man who'd spent 23 years believing I'd betrayed him, only to learn from Rebecca that he'd been another pawn in Catherine's elaborate game of perfect appearances. Better, he said simply. My department approved next semester's sabbatical. I'll be at Harvard from January through May. My heart stuttered. That's wonderful news. Rebecca thinks so, he said, a smile evident in his voice. She says it's time we all stopped living half lives because of Catherine's manipulations. Rebecca, who'd discovered an unexpected kinship with the man Catherine had claimed was her biological father, had become Thomas's fiercest advocate for reclaiming lost possibilities. She might be right, I admitted, thinking of my daughter's remarkable resilience in the face of shattered identity. 6 months ago, Thomas said carefully, I would never have believed any of this was possible. That learning the truth about the past could actually create space for something new. Neither would I confessed. After we said goodbye, I stood at my window overlooking the river, watching rowers glide across the water in perfect synchronicity. 6 months earlier, I'd been so certain that revealing Catherine's secrets would lead only to destruction. Relationships shattered beyond repair, connections severed permanently. Instead, the painful truth had cleared away decades of poisonous lies, creating space for something I hadn't dared hope for. Authenticity. The restaurant Marcus had chosen for our dinner was neither pretentious nor contrived, a small Italian place in the North End with checkered tablecloths and candles in Chianti bottles. Nothing like the meticulously curated establishments Catherine had always insisted upon for family gatherings. He arrived first, rising to greet me with a brief, still awkward embrace. At 35, my son looked younger somehow than he had 6 months ago. The perpetual tension around his eyes replaced by faint laugh lines, his posture more relaxed without the weight of the Blackwood legacy pressing down on his shoulders. You look well, I said, meaning it. I feel well, he replied, pulling out my chair. For the first time in maybe ever. His divorce from Vanessa had been finalized 3 months earlier, a surprisingly amicable separation between two people who recognized they'd been matched for all the wrong reasons. She'd moved to Chicago to pursue a career in art curation, a passion she'd never mentioned during their marriage. The conservatory offered me a full-time teaching position, Marcus said as we studied our menus, beginning next semester. I looked up in surprise. That's wonderful. Are you going to accept? I already did. His smile held a quiet confidence I'd rarely seen before. Richard is adjusting to the idea that the Blackwood legal dynasty ends with him. And how do you feel about that? Marcus considered the question seriously, as he now did all matters related to his authentic self. Relieved, terrified, free. Before I could respond, Rebecca arrived, bringing with her the energy she'd always carried, though now it seemed less frenetic, more purposeful. Her hair was shorter, her clothes less formally tailored, her smile quicker to appear. "Sorry, I'm late," she said, kissing my cheek before embracing Marcus with the easy affection they'd developed as newly discovered half-siblings. The taxi driver took the scenic route from the hotel. As we ordered wine and appetizers, I marveled at how different this gathering felt from our strained family dinners under Catherine's critical gaze. Conversation flowed naturally, without the careful self-censorship we'd all practiced in her presence. "I have something for both of you," Rebecca said after our entrees arrived. She removed a slim envelope from her bag, sliding it across the table. Thomas helped me find this. It took some digging through university archives. Inside was a photocopy of a newspaper clipping from 1984, a review of a student music recital at Boston University. Among the performers mentioned was William Blackwood, our father, described as a promising pianist whose interpretation of Debussy showed remarkable sensitivity and technical precision. Marcus stared at the article, his fingers tracing our father's name. "He played? Seriously enough to perform?" "Apparently so," Rebecca confirmed. "Before he abandoned music for law school, before he became the William Blackwood that Catherine ensured we all remembered, the stern patriarch, the distinguished attorney, the Blackwood dynasty cornerstone." "Another carefully constructed narrative," I murmured, thinking of the family secrets Catherine's wooden box had revealed. "Another true self sacrificed at the altar of appearances." "Thomas found more," Rebecca continued. "Grandfather wasn't just the cold corporate attorney Catherine described. He published poetry under a pseudonym. Grandmother painted, quite well, according to the art professor Thomas consulted. All these creative pursuits, deliberately hidden or minimized because they didn't fit the proper Blackwood image." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Generations of lives half-lived." "Until now," Rebecca said firmly, "the pattern stops with us." The determination in her voice struck me deeply. The same iron will Catherine had possessed, but turned toward truth rather than deception, toward liberation rather than control. "There's something else," Marcus said, setting down his fork. "I've been going through Richard's papers, consolidating things after the house sale. I found letters." "Letters?" I echoed. "From Richard to you. Written just after Catherine told him she was pregnant with me, with your child. Letters he never sent." My wine glass froze halfway to my lips. "What did they say?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "He wanted to leave her, to be with you, to raise me together. But Catherine threatened to expose financial improprieties at his firm, improprieties she had actually orchestrated but made look like his doing. She had evidence that would have ended his career, possibly resulted in criminal charges. The revelation landed like a physical blow. All these years, I'd believed Richard had simply chosen Catherine, the more suitable Blackwood wife. I'd never imagined he'd been as thoroughly manipulated as I had been. "Does Richard know you found these?" I managed. "Yes, we've talked about it. Several times, actually." Marcus twisted his napkin unconsciously. "It's been difficult, healing in some ways, to understand that he was as trapped as the rest of us." Rebecca reached for my hand across the table. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I admitted, the honesty still strange after decades of careful evasions. "It changes things, and doesn't." "He's asked about you," Marcus said quietly. "Several times." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond. Richard and I had maintained a careful distance despite our occasional coffee meetings. Too much history, too many complications still unresolved between us. Speaking of asking, Rebecca interjected, giving me space to absorb the revelation about Richard. Thomas wanted me to tell you he'll be calling about having dinner when he arrives in January. Just the two of you. A welcome change of subject, though no less emotionally charged. I'd like that. Good, she said decisively, because I already told him you'd say yes. The rest of the meal passed in lighter conversation. Rebecca's research, Marcus's music students, local gossip about former acquaintances still reeling from the Blackwood family revelations. No one mentioned Catherine directly, though her absence shaped our interaction nevertheless. The freedom we now had to speak openly, to laugh genuinely, to disagree without fear of retribution. As we walked together toward the parking lot, Rebecca slipped her arm through mine. "I've been seeing someone," she said casually. "A colleague in the linguistics department. His name is Michael." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased yet acutely aware that 6 months ago she wouldn't have shared such personal information with me. "Tell me about him." "He's brilliant, kind, divorced with a 10-year-old daughter who's fascinated by ancient languages." A small smile played at her lips. "He knows everything. About Catherine, about James Sullivan being my biological father, about our family's complicated history. I told him on our second date." The magnitude of this struck me powerfully. Rebecca, raised by me but shaped by Catherine's influence, choosing radical honesty where her biological mother would have demanded calculated secrecy. "That's brave," I said finally. "It's necessary," she corrected gently. "I can't build something real on a foundation of half-truths and strategic omissions. Not anymore. Not after seeing what that did to all of us." Marcus nodded in agreement. As we reached our cars, "It's exhausting, isn't it? Maintaining elaborate deceptions. I hadn't realized how much energy it consumed until I stopped doing it." We stood awkwardly for a moment, this new family configuration still finding its balance. Then Rebecca stepped forward and hugged me. A real embrace, not the perfunctory gesture Catherine had always deemed appropriate between mother and daughter. "I'm glad you told the truth," she whispered. "Even though it hurt. Even though we're still figuring out what it all means." When she released me, Marcus hesitated only briefly before offering his own embrace. Still reserved, still careful, but genuine. "We're having a small recital next month," he said as he stepped back. "Students and a few faculty members. Nothing fancy. But if you'd like to come," "I'd be honored," I replied, fighting unexpected tears. As they drove away, I remained standing in the parking lot, watching their taillights disappear into the Boston evening. The interaction we'd just shared would have been inconceivable 6 months ago. The honesty, the tentative warmth, the absence of Catherine's controlling influence dictating every word and gesture. Back at my apartment, I opened the balcony doors. Despite the autumn chill, letting fresh air sweep through rooms that felt somehow lighter after the evening's revelations. My phone chimed with a text from Richard. Marcus mentioned dinner went well. I'm glad. Such a simple message, yet impossible in the world Catherine had constructed. I hesitated before replying. It did. He told me about the letters. 3 dots appeared, and disappeared several times before his response came through. I've wanted to tell you for years. Never found the courage. Another failure among many. I considered my response carefully before typing. We were all Catherine's prisoners in different ways. Maybe it's time we stopped blaming ourselves for the locks she installed. His reply was immediate. Coffee this week? I'd like that, I answered truthfully. Setting down my phone, I moved to the bookshelf where I'd placed the wooden box containing Catherine's family secrets. Beside it now stood a small silver frame holding the photograph Rebecca had given me. Catherine, and me as children, laughing on a beach blanket, before life and lies had driven an unbridgeable chasm between us. I touched the glass gently, remembering not just the manipulative woman who had died still clutching her secrets, but also the sister, who had once shared ice cream cones and whispered nighttime confidences with me. Catherine had become a monster of sorts, but she had been made, not born, shaped by family legacies and societal expectations into someone who valued perfect appearances over messy truths. In the end, that had been her tragedy. She'd gained the flawless facade she so desperately desired but lost any chance at genuine connection along the way. My phone chimed again, a message from Marcus with a photo attachment. He'd found an old picture of Richard at the piano, from college days before he met either Catherine or me. Genetic disposition toward Debussy, apparently, the caption read. A small joke, an olive branch, a tentative acknowledgement of our biological connection. I smiled, typing back, clearly inherited. Along with your grandfather's talent. 6 months ago, such an exchange would have been unthinkable, acknowledging Marcus's true parentage, referencing the family secrets Catherine had buried, communicating directly without her careful mediation. The night air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves as I stood on my balcony, watching the river reflect city lights in fractured patterns. Somewhere across town, Richard was perhaps looking at the same view from his new condo, freed from the gilded cage Catherine had constructed for him. Rebecca was probably unpacking in her hotel room, planning her week in Boston before returning to Seattle and her new beginning. Marcus might be at his piano, playing the music he'd denied himself for decades. All of us, finding our way toward authentic lives after 34 years of elaborate pretense. My revelation at Catherine's memorial service had indeed shattered the perfect image she'd spent a lifetime constructing. But from those broken pieces, something unexpected had emerged. Not the complete destruction I'd feared, but the possibility of genuine connection built on honest foundation. The truth had set us free, not into perfect happiness, but into something far more valuable. The chance to become our authentic selves. To forge relationships based on reality rather than appearance, to break the generational pattern of deception that had claimed so many lives before ours. I thought of Thomas, arriving in January, a second chance neither of us could have imagined 6 months ago. I thought of Rebecca's new relationship built on complete honesty from the beginning. I thought of Marcus, reclaiming his passion for music that the Blackwood legacy had nearly extinguished. Small miracles, all of them, emerging from the wreckage of Catherine's carefully constructed facade. As autumn leaves spiraled down to the river below, I made a silent promise, to Catherine's memory, to Marcus and Rebecca, to myself. No more half-truths, no more strategic omissions, no more sacrificing authenticity at the altar of appearances. The Blackwood family legacy of deception had ended with Catherine's death and my subsequent revelations. Whatever came next, the continuing painful reckonings, the slow rebuilding of trust, the cautious explorations of new possibilities, would be founded on truth, however messy or inconvenient. In the morning, I would call Thomas to welcome him to Boston in January. I would confirm coffee with Richard, acknowledging our complicated history rather than pretending it didn't exist. I would register for a creative writing course at the community college, reclaiming the passion Catherine had dismissed as impractical decades ago, small steps toward an authentic life. Toward becoming the person I might have been without Catherine's manipulations, or perhaps someone new entirely, shaped by hard lessons and belated wisdom. Inside my apartment, the photograph of Catherine and me as children caught the lamplight. 2 sisters laughing before life and lies intervened. I touched the frame gently one last time before turning away. Goodbye, Catherine, I whispered to the empty room. The truth is finally free. And so are we. The autumn wind caught my words, carrying them out over the river, into the darkness, toward whatever future awaited us all, now that 3 decades of secrets had finally been laid to rest. Not an ending, but a beginning. Imperfect, uncertain, authentic at last. And in that authenticity lay the greatest freedom of all: the end.